Hey, good morning. It is good to see you guys. How many of you, this is church, we can be honest, show of hands, have at least some area of your life that you just need to be in control? Like you have a little bit of a control freak, even if it's in a small area. I know there's more of you out there. You're lying right now in church. Some of you are such control freaks that you have to resist the temptation to raise the hand of the person next to you. And if that was you really take notes today because this message is specifically for you, but I'm glad you guys are all with us. My name is Kevin. I'm one of the pastors around here. And you're here for week number 2 of this series called Who Do You Think You Are? Which is not like this snide question like, how dare you, who do you think you are? But a real question, who do you think you are? Where do you derive your sense of value or identity or worth? What drives that? What shapes that for you? And that's what we're kind of wrestling with is this big topic of identity. And for all of us, whether you're trying to figure out this Jesus stuff or you're following Jesus, is this journey we're all on of learning to see ourselves the way God sees us. See, we don't want to see ourselves too highly, we don't want to see ourselves too lowly, but rather rightly the way God sees us, the way He created us. And we said this last week and we'll keep saying it's so important that we talk through these things and work through these things constantly, because if you do not know who you are, the world will tell you who to be. If you don't know who God says you are, what He believes about you, how He sees you, then all kinds of other things can not only define your identity for you, but also distract you from becoming the person God has actually created you to be. In fact, I love the way Dallas Willard says this. I don't know if you've ever read any of his books or heard him teach, but Dallas Willard says this about identity, that the most important thing in your life is not what you do, it's who you become. That's what you will take into eternity. See, we live in a culture that tells us our identity, that you have to kind of look within to find it, or read the right kind of book, or go like meditate in the Himalayas for a year to figure it out, that our identity is wrapped up in what you do, or what you have, or what you desire. But when you come to the story of creation, of what Jesus teaches us, He says, no, your identity was given to you in creation, and it is reconciled to God through me. And we all are on this kind of journey of trying to figure that out, see ourselves the way God sees us. And today, we're going to talk about when our identity, when we misunderstand who we are, who we're not, we can have some control issues in our life. And all of us, every one of us, at least in some aspect of our life, has a need to lay down our desire to control something that really we're not in charge of, that we can't. Now, what's interesting to me is that everybody I know, they have at least some area of their life that they're kind of controlling in, and then other areas where they're a completely different person. They're really relaxed. Like some of you, maybe you're really controlling at work. Everything has to be your way or it's the highway, and you're really buttoned up, but then when you get home, you're completely different person. You're super laid back and relaxed. But you're sitting next to someone who is the exact opposite of that. At home, it is their way or you will be punished. They're very controlling there, but at work, they're a little more chill. Or maybe for you, you're more controlling with your finances. You know where every penny goes, but when it comes to your kids, you're not even sure where they are right now. You're just pretty confident they're fine. But, right, we're all a little different like that. In fact, my wife and I, we laugh often because we are just so different than each other in so many ways. She's very much just a typical type A person. She does not shy away from just being decisive or making decisions or being controlling. And you guys, you should have seen her Friday. Our 7th grader got back from 7th grade camp. He was gone all week. And about 2 hours before the buses arrived at the school, they sent one of those emails no parent wants to get that in all caps was urgent, parents, please read, because they had found bed bugs. And my wife's brain about exploded. She could not handle this. And it's funny because my person, I was oh, whatever, there's bed bugs, we'll figure it out. And even in me saying that now, she got mad last night. She was they don't just go away. And I'm all right, relax. But we're just different people. We respond differently in different ways. And we all, though, tend to try to be controlling in one or two kind of broad categories. Okay, we either try to be controlling of people or we try to control circumstances. Right? Maybe you have that person in your life who's always maybe trying to control you. And maybe you're a young person. You're already dreading going home for Thanksgiving because your mom in no subtle way will ask if you're seeing anyone. You know what she's after. Or maybe you're a young couple and you have your own plan of when you will have kids, but you have people in your family who have plans for you. And you know when you show up to family or holiday events, everyone's waiting for you to make that big announcement, and it's like they're trying to control your baby making plans. Like, it's weird when people do that stuff. Or maybe you have that friend on Facebook who makes those really cryptic posts. I just hope tomorrow's a better day. You're like, well, that's so like controlling of you. You're trying to like manipulate me to have interest in your day by posting weird, vague stuff. Like, it's just an odd thing people do. See, you and I, without even meaning to, we can be kind of manipulative of people, like sometimes offering rewards or withholding rewards or being passive aggressive or even threatening, because we have this sense or this need to control other people sometimes. And every time we do, it's almost like we're saying, hey, God, just scoot over. I have the best plan for this person. Like, I know you're a human and an adult, but I got this for you. Whether it's a coworker, people who work for you, your kids, your spouse, we try to control people, but we also try to control circumstances. Right? Some of us, we try to control how we look. We want to make sure we look just right all the time. We try to control what other people then would think of us, or we try to control our kids and make sure that when they're out in public, they are a perfect representation of us and our family. We try to control our homes and always keep it perfect. We try to control schedules. We try to control the future. And in all of these situations in life, oftentimes what's happened is it's like our ego has gotten a little inflated and we're trying to control stuff that we can't. In fact, I love the way this guy Ken Blanchard describes ego. He says ego, E-G-O, actually stands for edging God out. Because that's what we're really doing. When I'm trying to control another person or I'm trying to control some circumstance that's way above my pay grade, I'm just saying like, hey, God, you just scoot over. I can handle this. I'm trying to control something that I want my way. In fact, you might have not have known this, but that little control freak in all of us actually has a theme Bible verse. You might not know that, but you will now. It's in Proverbs chapter 3, and it's in the CFV translation of the Bible, and it says this: trust in the Lord with some of your heart and lean on your own understandings, and in some of your ways acknowledge God, and you will make your paths straight. Now, the CFV translation is actually the control freak version of the Bible. It's not real. It's what we want it to say. That's how we want to control it, because we don't want to have to lean on God's understandings and submit to Him in all of our ways, because we're pretty smart and we think we got this, and that's why we try to control people or circumstances. But that verse, what it actually says in a real translation of the Bible, is like the antidote to control for you and I. It reads like this in Proverbs 3, verses 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. See, we're invited to be in relationship with a God who promises to be the author of our life and invites you and I to give up control and trust, to follow. It's like that verse is telling you and I, the more you try to control stuff, the more fearful you become that you'll lose control of that stuff. And the more fearful you become of losing control, the more you work at trying to control it. And you just get stuck in this spiral, this cycle of fear, living outside of your identity, wasting time and energy, and allowing it often to steal the joy out of our lives by trying to control stuff that we can't. And I feel like this is a moment in a sermon where every one of us needs to just for a quick second readjust our mindset. Because it's right about now that I feel like we start going, oh, this is exactly the message so-and-so needs to hear. Which is exactly us all missing the point. Because this is about you. The real challenge with this control stuff is it's easy to see in somebody else's life. It's far more difficult to see in the mirror as you look in your own life and the way you edge God out and try to control things that you shouldn't. And so today I want to show you an example from the Bible in Genesis chapter 16. If you have your Bibles, you can open up there. An example of control gone bad. And then we're going to ask ourselves a couple of very simple but profound questions that I think will help you and I unlock this control issue that we have in life. This is a story about Abraham and Sarah, how they faced a tremendous problem, but like most of us, tried to take control of the circumstances for themselves. To really understand Genesis 16, you have to back up and understand where the story started in Genesis 12. When God came to this couple who were much older in their years and had been unable to conceive a child, childless, and wanting to be a family, God comes and makes an incredible promise to these two and says, not only are you older than most people when they'll have kids, but I got you. Not only are you going to have a kid, I'm going to make you two the parents of many nations. I'm going to give you more descendants than the sand on the seashore and the stars in the sky. Like, I'm going to make you the parent of many nations, and I'm going to bless you. And as I bless you, you're going to bless the world around you. And to two people who had yet to have a kid, this was an incredible promise given to them by God, by Abraham and Sarah. We land in Genesis 16. When God hadn't immediately fulfilled his promise in their timing, chose to do what many of us try to do, is take things into our own control, step past the promises of God, and do it ourselves. And it leads to chaos and many, many consequences. And instead of me just reading this story to you, the very creative people in our arts department came up with a little more memorable way to tell this very true story. Watch.
Abram's wife Sarai had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave girl named Hagar.
Fetch me some water, would you, dear?
And Sarai said to Abram,
Yahweh has prevented me from bearing children, so get jiggy with my slave girl. Maybe I can build a family through her.
What?
Getting jiggy with it. Getting jiggy with it.
Hagar conceived, and once she realized she was pregnant, she treated Sarai with contempt.
Fetch me some water, would you, dear?
Oh, don't you even try to use my accent.
And Sarai said to Abram,
This wrong done to me is your fault. I gave you my slave girl, and now she regards me with contempt. May Yahweh judge between you and me. I'm gonna get my broom.
Abram said to Sarai,
Whoa, your slave girl is under your command. Do with her as you see fit.
So Sarai treated her harshly, and Hagar ran away from her.
Go on now, get! Y'all out here trying to have my babies?
The angel of Yahweh found Hagar by a spring of water in the desert, and said, Hagar, slave girl of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?
I am running away from my owner, Sarai.
And the angel said, Go back to your owner, and humble yourself to her. I will greatly multiply your descendants, such that they cannot be counted. You shall bear a son, and call him Ishmael. He will be a wild donkey of a man, and live in hostility to all of his brothers.
That doesn't sound good, but okay. You are the angel of Yahweh. So...
Hagar bore Abraham a son, and Abraham named him Ishmael. Abraham was 86 years old.
I mean, maybe before now you didn't know what Lego babies look like. Maybe you've forgotten Will Smith used to rap. As crazy or maybe ridiculous as that seems, because it was, that depicts what happens in the story. Where two people, though God had made this incredible promise, said, no, you're taking too long. Let's come up with our own way. And it just led to all kinds of relational breakdowns and issues. And I feel like that story is a powerful reminder to you and I hope you'll read actually Genesis 16 this week and read more of the details of the story. But it's such a reminder of two really important things in life. One, never, ever, 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 ever sleep with your maid or your nanny or anyone other than your wife, even if she suggests it. And number two is don't forget rule number one. But seriously, when you read that story, it is hard to imagine and describe all of the consequences that came from that decision those two people made, trying to take control of something that was not theirs to take control of. Because not only would there continue to be tension between Hagar and Sarah, and then the son Ishmael, eventually Sarah would have a son named Isaac. And for many, many centuries and many, many generations, there has just been constant tensions and war and bloodshed because the descendants of Ishmael are the Palestinians and the descendants of Isaac are the Jewish people. And there have been all kinds of issues that come back to this simple story in Genesis 16 where two people decided to take things into control themselves, to step back past the promises of God and edge him out. And you're sitting right there, and I know you're like, okay, well, I would never do that. I don't even have a maid. That's crazy. But we do this where we know God has a best for us. We know he has a plan. We know he's made promises, and he has a way for us to live life, and yet we choose often to ignore those things because it makes more sense to do it our way. We choose to lean into our own understandings instead of his. Maybe you're here and you're You're a young woman of God and you want to get married. You love Jesus and you want a great Christian man, but you just haven't found a good Christian man, so you just settle for a man. You feel like he's good enough and I can make this work, and you are compromising and settling for less than God's best in your life. And maybe it's really awkward because he's sitting next to you at church today, and you're like, this isn't him. Maybe for you it's financial. You're a follower of Jesus. You know the tithe belongs to the Lord, and yet you compromise and rationalize and say things like, well, I got to get out of debt first, and I got to accomplish this and this and this. And you settle for less than God's best in your life and choose to lean into your own understandings and do it your way. You edge him out. Maybe for you, it's just financial discipline. You're constantly getting in more and more debt and behind. You always see things you want to buy even though you don't have the money for it. And you know God says, don't get in debt. But you kind of just edge him out, and you choose to make long-term decisions for very short-term benefits. And every time we push God aside and take things into our own control, it comes with consequences and tensions in our relationships and in our circumstances. So I don't know right now in your life what that issue is for you, that thing that you're trying to control, but I want you to ask yourself this question and identify it. What are you trying to control? What are you trying to control right now in the season of your life? What is it? What is that thing? Is it a person? Is it your kids? Is it your grown kids? Is it the way your grown kids are raising your grandkids and you're pretty sure they're messing it up? Is it coworkers, people that work with you? Is it your spouse? Or is it your image? Is it what other people think about you? What are you trying to control? I want you to identify that thing and picture it in your mind. And I'm going to walk us through just 3 simple questions that have the power to help you and I unlock this sense of trying to control stuff that we cannot and learn to trust God more. So picturing that in mind, I want you to ask yourself this question about that thing that you're trying to control. First is this. Is it worth my concern? Right? Sometimes we're guilty of trying to control stuff and getting really bent out of shape about stuff that actually doesn't really matter. In fact, in the New Testament, we're given this really cool example where Jesus gives this perspective to Martha, but really to all of us. There's a story where in Luke 10, Jesus is hanging out with people like he always was. They're at this house. Martha and Mary are both there. Mary is choosing to hang out with Jesus. Martha is just worrying about a bunch of stuff that really isn't that big of a deal, and she's trying to make everything perfect and control everything, and she's getting mad at Mary because Mary's in there helping and hanging out with Jesus, not helping her, and she's being lazy, and she's getting angry, so she comes out, and she calls out Mary in front of Jesus and everybody else, thinking Jesus is going to side with her, and he doesn't. And in Luke chapter 10, verse 41, this is what happens. It says, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered. You're worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Jesus is saying, Martha, this is not worth getting so upset about. This is not worth you trying to control, and too often you and I need this exact same perspective. What is that thing you're trying to control? Is it worth your concern? Meaning, like in a month from now, will you have forgotten about this thing? Is it not that big of a deal? I mean, think about it. Does it really matter if all of the towels are folded just perfectly in your bathroom? Freedom, right? You're getting freedom right now. It doesn't matter. Does it really matter if your car is clean all the time? Does it really matter if your kid goes to school without combing his hair perfectly? Does it really matter? I mean, we so often get so bent out of shape about stuff that it's not that big a deal, or without meaning to, we miss up our priorities by focusing too much on something and missing the bigger thing. I feel like this has happened to me a few times as a dad. Just I want to have a nice green yard. Like I like grass and mowing it, and my yard frustrates me because it doesn't ever want to participate in the way I want it to. And one time we used to live just down from the big house in Ann Arbor, and we had a very small front yard and a non-existent backyard. So we would hang out in the front yard all the time. And I have 3 boys, and so they would wear cleats and just destroy the yard. And I was always trying to fix the yard, but also hang out with them. So this would happen 3-4 times a week. Me and my sons, we'd be out throwing a football in the front yard. And there was this really cute older couple that would always take a lap around the block at night. And many times when they would pass our family, they would just stop and watch. And you could see it in their eyes, just replaying the times in their life when they were raising their kids. And one time they came by and my kids were playing and I was picking weeds and trying to work on the yard. And he offered me unsolicited advice, as old men are awesome at doing. Right? Because they're right. I just didn't ask for it. But he looks across the street and he goes, you can grow a good yard later. You can only grow those kids once. I was like, you're right. Right? Now, it's nothing wrong with taking care of a yard, but sometimes without realizing it, we misprioritize stuff, and we get so bent out of shape about trying to control stuff that really It just doesn't matter. I don't know what that is for you in your life. But here's the second question, because maybe it is worth your concern. So the second question then you need to ask yourself is this: is it mine to control? See, is it even for me to try and control? And sometimes the answer is yes, but a lot of times the answer is no. And then understanding that there's a difference between surrendering control of something and relinquishing responsibility. Those aren't the same things. You might need to surrender control to a bunch of stuff in your life, but still take responsibility to work on the things that you can. Right? So say you're in a financial mess right now. Things aren't going very well. Is there some stuff you can do and take responsibility for? Absolutely. You can get on a budget. You can read some books. You can get a mentor, some accountability. You can cut up credit cards. There's a lot of things you can do to deal with that issue in your life. Or maybe your marriage is a mess. Maybe you haven't been on a date with your spouse in a long time. Is there some stuff you can do? Absolutely. You can take her on a date. You can initiate counseling. You can read a book together. You can do devotionals and pray for one another. There's a ton of things you can do, like go to church together and be in small groups together. There's a ton of stuff you can be responsible for. Or maybe you're a single guy in here and you haven't been on a date in like 7 years. Is there some stuff you can do? Absolutely. Should you wait and trust on the Lord? Of course, but there's a lot of stuff you can do and take initiative on, like selling your Xbox or becoming the man that someday any woman would want to marry, right? I mean, if I were you, I would come to every single church service we have around here every week and just put yourself in a place where God might bless you, right? When there's someone's worshiping, you see if she has a ring on her finger. And I'm not being like creepy, but just look. Be on every dating Christian site there is. Like, take some initiative, take some responsibility. Should you wait on the Lord? Of course, but there's stuff you can do. But there are so many times in life when it comes to these issues of control that it is not ours to even try to control. You can't. And it is in those moments that you and I have to make a very important decision. Are we going to let go? Are we going to let God be who he promises to be for us? In fact, in the New Testament, the Apostle James gives us this perspective of what we control and don't as this great reminder, so practical. And he kind of like is speaking to the control freak in all of us. He says this in James chapter 4, verses 13 and 14. Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow, we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why? You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. James is saying, hey, remember how fast life is going? Time is flying. So don't try to control things that you can't control. Don't try to, there's only so much you can plan. You can't iron everything out. You can't spreadsheet the future. Tomorrow is a mystery. There is so much uncertainty in the future. And you and I are reminded that today is a gift and our responsibility is to live in the moment and today and not try to control a bunch of stuff that we can't. And that leads us to the most important question, which is it for God alone? And is it for God alone? I mean, it might be worth your concern, but it might be completely outside of your control. And so you come to this moment of, is it for God alone? You come down to this moment where you realize that the question really becomes, do I trust God with this? And the answer we all want to say is always yes, but it's so much harder to really trust. And at least in my life, I have found that the areas that I want to control the most are really the areas of my life where I trust God the least. The Apostle Paul talks about this in the book of Philippians. In Philippians 4, he says it this way: do not be anxious about anything. Look, don't let your ego get overinflated. Don't try to control a bunch of stuff, because that just leads to anxiety. Don't get anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I love that. Because it's verses like this that are promises from God that you and I can hold them to. In moments where we realize we cannot control it, we can come to God and say, hey, you promised that if I can stop trying to hold on to this and rather let go of this, that you will give me a peace that surpasses all understanding. No matter how crazy the circumstance and the thing is that I'm dealing with, that you, God, can protect and guard my heart and my mind. Try to hold on to it and it will lead to anxiety. Let go of it and it will equate to peace. God's saying, you surrender control to me, and I will give you peace in exchange. Stop trying to control stuff you can't control anyway, allowing it to steal the joy and the peace of your life. Let me ask you a couple of practical application questions, like simple yes or no questions. I want you to answer these out loud, yes or no. Can you change your spouse? No, not a trick question. You can't. Now, you know what you can do? You can pray for your spouse. You can love your spouse, encourage your spouse, write notes to your spouse, but you can't change them. So what do you do if you're married to a spouse that needs some changing? Trust them to God. Pray for them and encourage them, but you trust them to God. Yes or no? Can you heal a sick one that you love? Can you heal someone who's sick? No. Can God? Yes. Can you? No. So what can you do? You can pray for them, you can support them, you can help them find good medical advice, but at the end of the day, you have to trust them to God and allow Him to give you a peace that surpasses all understanding, that can guard your mind and your heart. Here's another one. Yes or no? Can you control the future? No. All the answers are no, by the way, in case you haven't figured out this test. No, you can't control the future. You can't control the future of your child. You can't control the future of a loved one. You can't control the future of the economy. You can't control the future. So what can you do? You can plan. You can try to make wise choices. You can seek wise counsel. But at the end of the day, you must trust God who can. And ask for that sense of peace, to give to Him what only He can be in charge of. I don't know what area of life you are most tempted to try to control, but I do know that today God is inviting you to let go of it and trust Him. And as I was preparing this week to talk about this, it reminded me of a story in my life where God taught me this in the most powerful way in my life. Actually, I got a tattoo about this moment in my life because God led me to this Bible verse that just spoke to me. It didn't say what I wanted it to say, but it's what it was. And people ask me about this tattoo all the time. It's this word that I tattooed on my arm here, which is the word sufficient. Which people are always like, why'd you get sufficient? Like, that's a weird, motto for your life. Just trying to, be sufficient, which is not. I like to joke about it, but that's not. The reason I got this word tattooed on my arm is I went through a season in my life where I was trying to control a bunch of stuff that was not my place to control. I was trying to control my weaknesses and not let anybody know about them. Keep them in a closet, control, don't let my wife know, don't let other people know, pretend like they're not there, hope they'll go away someday, or they'll just disappear. I was trying to control what others thought of me, that they can't know that I have these weaknesses or these struggles in my life. And so in all of this sense of control, it became like this moment where I was trying to keep a bunch of beach balls below the water, which wasn't gonna last for very long. And when those surfaced, I felt like my life sunk and fell apart. I lost my job. I almost lost my marriage. But more importantly, I lost the ability to control what other people thought of me. At the time, it was horrible. But in hindsight, it's the best thing that God has ever given to me. Because I could no longer try to control something that was not mine to control and spend my time and my energy wasted in such a way. And what God led me to was this verse in 2 Corinthians where the Apostle Paul is telling his own story that's very similar, that he was given a thorn in his flesh, something he did not want, that he wished would go away, and he's praying, going, God, can you just take it? Can you take it? And God's answer to him was his answer to me, his answer to you. It's not what we want, but here's what he says in 2 Corinthians 12, verses 9 and 10. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses and insults and hardship and persecution and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. See, we're invited into a relationship with a God who is enough. And we're invited to be real about who we are and who we are not. And instead of hiding our weaknesses, actually boast about those, because it is in our weaknesses that who God truly is and what He's fully capable is best on display. That in the hardships, in the persecution, in the things that we go through in life that we cannot control and we wish were otherwise, God is saying, no, in every one of those moments is an opportunity to know me better. To not lean into your own understanding, but rather to submit to me in all my ways. To not see yourself too highly or lowly, but rightly as He sees us. promises to be with us, near to us, and a giver of peace, the kind of peace that can surpass whatever struggle it is, whatever thing it is that you cannot control. We're invited to let go. I don't know what that is for you today, but I just know that in your weaknesses, that's where God's the strongest.